Hey Burns, how's it?
Okay, I guess, Dick, all things considered, although I have a complaint to start with. I'm an Irishman, as you well know, and Kathy came back from Sam's and I asked her if she got two corned beefs because I always like to have leftovers. And she said, no, not this year. And the one she did buy, she had to finance.
Huh.
So a, a tip of the cap to Joe Biden. I don't know what we'd do without that guy. I mean, it, it would take what, a dozen podcasts just to enumerate all the crap he's done to this country of ours. I mean, we're each 74 years old. Have we ever seen this in our lifetime? Carter was close, but I think now it's fair to say, tell me if you disagree, that Carter comes in a distant second, that Biden's almost lapped Jimmy Carter.
Well, I was watching him on TV yesterday and he's slipping fast. I mean, he stumbled, he misquoted stuff. It's pathetic. And what really scared me is I'm going, this guy is going to talk to she.
Well, before we get to she, which I would like to talk about, uh, the other thing that irritated me, and to your point about Biden, on St. Pat's Day, and I guess he thought he was being cute, or I shouldn't say that. He has no clue what he's doing at any moment in time. But he came out to the microphone and he made the sign of the cross. I'm Catholic. Biden claims to be, but my attitude is if you like to kill babies right up until the time of birth, you can't call yourself Catholic. But anyways, he made the sign of the cross and then he made a statement that although I'm Irish, I'm not dumb, which of course translated means in his mind, all Irishmen other than himself are dumb. So I took umbrage at that, but of course I take umbrage virtually every day when I read about Joe Biden.
But I miss that and I find it absolutely unbelievable that he would do that. But then I look at how he's been slipping this week. I'm not pleased with him. I'm disappointed with the military leadership, many of whom I know. And I just can't believe it. It's like we're going to hell in a handcart.
Well, Dick, uh, hell, I wasn't even going to bring this up, but to your point about being disappointed with the military, did you read about the West Point spring breakers down in Florida?
Yes, absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, uh, doing coke and fentanyl. You know, to say that kind of conduct is disgraceful, and the news reports I've read, which frankly anymore I don't know what's true and what isn't when the legacy media reports something, but they say what occurred on spring break wasn't isolated to spring break, that it's happening within the walls of the academies, the service academies.
I would
And
agree.
and if I mean, these are supposed to be men and women who are a cut above. Is that fair?
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah. And I was just appalled at that.
Well, out of fairness, but again, and it just hit me a while back. I mean, everything I refer back to tends to go back 50 years when I met my wife. And prior to that, I worked with West Point grads, West Point cadets, I mean, you name it. And they were all really great. But again, this is 50 years later. But I would agree with you. If it happened on spring break, it's probably happening on campus. But then
Yeah.
the issue really becomes, you know, what's causing it? Nobody looks at causology. All they do is come up with this is what happened. But
Well,
I
fentanyl's coming in from China through Mexico and across our open border that Joe Biden has provided us with.
you're right. They're the major source.
Yep, yep.
But the question becomes is why would somebody, particularly somebody at one of the academies, be so stupid as to do this? I mean, it's like stupid is as stupid does.
Well, I have mentioned in previous podcasts, I enjoy reading military history, and this World War II is an example. And Marshall assembled, I mean, he was kind of the, well, not kind of, he was the exemplar of personnel manager recruiter. He handpicked all the generals, and in doing so, got rid of a slew of generals, that he replaced with the Pattons and the Bradleys and the Eisenhowers and so forth. I mean, that was a pantheon of great military leaders, and I've never read any biographies that they ever did cocaine or fentanyl or any controlled substance. They probably enjoyed a cigarette or a cigar, but so what?
Well, yeah, I have to say it, and I wasn't going to, but when I was living in Monterey, I used to go to church on Sunday, and Omar Bradley went to the same church, was there every morning, and I met the guy. He's something else. He was something else. Absolutely unbelievable. One of the most impressive people I've ever met in my whole life.
Anyways, that was, I guess we'll move on from that one and wait for, further reports to come out, which I trust we'll hear some more on the topic.
Didn't you want to talk about oligarchs' yachts?
Well, I tried to make the point at the end of the last podcast 34, and we were out of time, so I don't know that I made it well or amplified it, but I would like to think, although I suspect there's probably not a young person in the country that has given it much thought, but I sure would like to think that our young people, and I'm talking about, I guess, the millennials, have seen with the war in Ukraine, the unprovoked invasion of Russia into the Ukraine, and the sanctions that the Western nations, the NATO nations are imposing, that they're taking away the yachts of the Russian oligarchs, as well as condominiums. I mean, there's just been reports on the news the last 3-4 days. Apparently, a lot of these oligarchs had fancy condos down in South Florida. But back to the yachts, the couple of pictures I've seen, these things look 3 blocks long. I mean, there are yachts and then there are mega yachts, and these all, to me, seem to be in the mega yacht category. And doesn't that make a comment about communist socialism? whether it's communist slash socialism or socialism slash communism. In other words, the philosophy that Bernie Sanders talks about. And of course, Bernie Sanders went over to Russia and was wined and dined and came back to this country espousing that, if you want to, follow the right political philosophy, get thee to Russia. But young people need to understand when they take, they assault verbally or in writing our capitalist system, or what's left of it, that these totalitarian regimes, the money always works its way up to the precious few at the top, and they live like kings. They live, like the so-called capitalist barons of old, and it's the people, the common man, who have nothing or lack for a lot of basic needs. And but I've not seen it. I swear to God, and I read it extensively, I've not seen a single editorial piece or political column on the insanity of what's happening in this country with the radical left trying to impose Marxism, and that's what they're trying to impose on the nation through a huge transformation. And now we have just an example hitting us right in the nose of how Russia really works in terms of the distribution of wealth. The distribution of wealth is not among, the everyday Russian. It's the oligarchs with their Swiss bank accounts and their homes, fancy palatial estates all over the world, and their private jets and their yachts. So I think I've amplified it a little better than the last podcast, but that's I think there's an object lesson there if people will only take a look.
Well, let me bring up something that is not very popular, probably going to cause a big backlash. But my wife and I were talking, and the question is, everybody's going after Putin. What about the poor Russian people? And I got to go on record as saying I have no sympathy. I mean, it's, there are those that are demonstrating against the war. There are those who think Putin is still the greatest thing since hot borscht. I have no sympathy. I think, number one, the whole country deserves to be pilloried. Number two, I understand or hear that there's been $100 billion worth of damage in Ukraine. I think Russia should pay for it. And as far as Zelensky goes, willing to do diplomatic talks and maybe be neutral and everything else, I say no go. No go at all. I mean, they started it. The Ukrainians will probably finish it. And what's interesting about this whole thing is you got the second largest army in the world, most of which is now poised around Ukraine, and it's getting slaughtered. It's getting slaughtered for the same reasons I've said many times before: lack of logistics, rubble tactics. The Russians have used it for years. They used it in World War II. Line up 1,000 howitzers and just blow everything away. The other thing that gets me is the random shelling. I mean, at least we've got intelligent bombs that go where they're supposed to go. Their rockets don't. And so I have absolutely no sympathy for any Russian, period. I've got sympathy for Ukraine. Oh, and by the way, you know, I did that GoFundMe thing, which I now understand I totally screwed up. But the World Kitchen is feeding people. And we're talking people starving. We're talking about kids getting killed, and you know, innocent people. I mean, this is unacceptable.
Well, I'll build on what you just said, and then I'll ask a question of you. It'd be one thing if Russia was conducting a war far, far away from its borders, but the fact that it's gone into the Ukraine unprovoked, where many Russians live, and it's indiscriminately slaughtering women and children. And right now, as we speak, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the city, but there's a city in close proximity to the border with Poland. And the way I understand it is it's become a staging area to move what's amounted to, and some of these people are already in Poland, but my understanding at this juncture is that there's something like 3 million people who've become refugees and have either evacuated or in the process of evacuating Ukraine and going to Poland. So and by the way, President Zelensky ordered, and I don't even know that he needed to order, but he ordered all men between 18 and age 60 to remain in country and fight. So it goes without saying the staging area has to be predominantly women and children or elderly men. And they're bombing the hell out of that city now. So Putin knows what he's doing. And
He does? Hey, hold it. He does?
Well, you know what I mean, in the sense of what many have labeled war crimes. So I can't believe for a minute that Russians across the border from the Ukraine aren't aware of what's going on. And to your point, they just can't go about their business and look the other way, and you know, somehow you know, be held neutral in the minds of those of us who are watching this slaughter. And the question I had of you, because you mentioned it to me before we began recording this podcast, it sounds as though, Dick, there's some parallels here with what the Germans did in World War II, at least in the sense that you told me that Ukraine has a pretty sizable Jewish population. And we know that, you know, Putin's not making any effort whatsoever to confine himself to military targets. And in fact, it appears that he's going out of his way now, because to date he's losing, that he's purposely hitting civilian targets.
Well, I've always looked militarily at the invasion, and it's like Operation Barbarossa reversed. Barbarossa being when Hitler went to the Western Front and, you know, tried to, you know, shellac Russia. That's one side. But the other side is, and it's kind of interesting, is Putin claiming that Ukraine is filled full of Nazis and whatever. I mean, that's just ultimate stupidity. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. So again, I always try to go back to what motivates these kind of comments. And it's almost like, well, it's like Hitler in reverse.
Yeah.
Instead of going west, Putin's going east.
I'm hearing now that there's more and more concern that Putin will either go into Poland or maybe Poland may be drawn into the war. In other words, there have been any number of instances of missiles being fired in close proximity to the border. I mean, it's kind of, if you're sitting in your living room and you're up on a hillside in Honolulu, Dick, and missiles are landing downtown Honolulu, you'd be a little concerned, right?
Well, I think I'm far enough away. I mean, no. As I look out over Pearl Harbor and the Arizona Memorial and everything else, and remember we had that false bomb thing where parents
Yeah.
would put their kids in sewers and everything else because they thought there was incoming from North Korea. But let me digress beyond that. What's interesting is you notice all the actors that are real, excuse my French, assholes. You got, North Korea jumping on board, Syria jumping on board, China waiting to see what happens. It's almost like they're using Russia as a proxy. How is the United States going to react? Well, if EU, European Union, decides to defend Europe, excluding NATO, which I think it should be in a way, I don't think there's much to worry about for Americans. But what bothers me, and I was talking to some German friends a couple of hours ago, they won't even comment on it. I said, well, what's happening? And they go, don't want to talk about it. Now, what does that mean? Do they expect us to come in and save everybody's butt? I can tell you that the stuff we've moved into Poland and et cetera, will if launched, will absolutely flatten the Russian forces. I mean, it'll totally do a job on them.
Yeah, the only thing I don't understand, because I haven't read anything on it, I've not heard any proposals, is there's been no talk of something tantamount to the Berlin airlift that you and I would remember from our history books. How are the Ukrainians doing in terms of food and water? If they get all these armaments, but they can't subsist because they lack potable water, food, and I presume probably medical supplies are in major demand. I don't know why NATO countries couldn't announce a Berlin style, something comparable to what we did for Berlin airlift, and just make it clear that this is not an engagement with Russian troops. It's not an escalation of the war, but that based on the indiscriminate slaughter of civilian populations in the Ukraine that it's a humanitarian mission. And
Well,
oh, by the way, Dick, and then I'll shut up. And this comes up over and over again, at least for conservatives such as I. Where in the hell is the United Nations? Why do we have this tall building in New York and we have liberals from however many countries plop in the US and twiddle their thumbs and they don't accomplish anything. They comment on everything and do nothing.
well, let me take those in order. First of all, as much as I know, most of the airframes are used to bring in humongous pallets of weapons. The free corridors and everything that have been set up normal times, they've lasted, what, 3 minutes? I mean, they don't honor it. So if you try to bring in food on these planes, which I call airframes, they're not going to get through, which is why I support World Kitchen, because they have, kitchens set up now in Moldova, Poland, whatever, where they're feeding the people. But as far as trying to bring stuff in, remember the Russians have said any of these flights coming in are now considered, fair targets, I guess. So, that's not the answer. And if you shipped a bunch of food to Ukraine where they don't have gas, they don't have heating, they don't have water, they don't have electricity, I mean, the food wouldn't do much. The only thing you can really do is put food on the western side. Poland, Moldavia, now Romania, a bunch of other places. But I think the Russians would just take it out, like the big food storage area that they blew up yesterday. I think it was Lviv, where they blew it up, food supplies, everything gone.
My understanding is the Russian troops are stealing food at every turn because they're not being properly supplied.
Oh, yeah, and they're robbing stores and allegedly they're raping, which again, the Russians did. Yeah, look at Berlin, the Battle of Berlin. And what you're seeing is it being repeated against. And so they're not being fed. Well, their food sucks anyway. So, what can we say? I'll say it again. I have no sympathy for Russians, period. And I know Russians. I know Ukrainians. Ukrainians are, or at least weren't, the world's most popular people. But what's happening is an absolute travesty. Who was it? Lindsey Graham was said maybe it's time to take Putin out. Maybe it was him. I'm not sure who it was, but the sad part of that is you take him out. Okay, but you take out Putin, and there's a whole bunch of people that are just as bad. The people you were talking about, the haves. They don't care about the Russian people. They never have. They care about themselves.
It's an example of one. I don't suggest I know a lot of people from the Ukraine, but one of the specialists I see is Ukrainian, and she's one of the brightest women I've ever met in my life. Absolutely bright and a wonderful doctor. So again, an example of one.
Well, my last visit to the emergency room, the doctor was Ukrainian, and even though he was somewhat cold and detached and everything, I mean, he was very, very competent. On the other hand, my cardiologist is Jordanian. I mean, these people have a lot of talent, and to see what's happening is totally unacceptable.
By the way, and this will sound like a segue, but I'll introduce it in the context of what we're talking about, the Ukraine war. But if we take this horrible situation in the Ukraine and we add to it the bungled exit from Afghanistan, and we add to it the open southern border, runaway inflation, record gasoline prices, crippled supply chain, promises galore when Biden campaigned from his basement that he would solve the COVID pandemic. Crime in the streets. I mean, every major city in the country, and particularly in the blue states, has seen its homicide rate go up mercurially, and on it goes. Given all that as a backdrop, what do you think our US Congress concerned itself with in the past week?
Who knows? Who watches Congress?
I do. In the US Senate, they proposed legislation, and by the way, it passed. It moves on now to the House, that we keep daylight savings time year round. And immediately, sleep experts and scientists galore said if you're going to mess with the time change to try to standardize it, it should be standard time. That there's all kinds of reasons that you don't want to stay with daylight savings year round. They talked about circadian rhythms and the impact on a good night's sleep, etc. But anyways, regardless of the merits of daylight savings versus standard time, is that really the issue of the moment? And then we move over into the Nancy Pelosi House of Representatives. And this is a real good one. They have passed a bill that makes hairstyles and examples in it are mostly the hairstyles that Black women wear today, that you cannot discriminate on the basis of the hairstyle, the hairdo, and so forth. I mean, that it takes some time for a bill to go into committee, get out of committee, eventually get a House vote. So that's what they're worried about, is how hair becomes an issue, if it does at all, in the workplace. So I just mentioned that because I think people need to be cognizant of just how ridiculous this Congress is. But with few exceptions in the House or in the Senate, that most of these people go to Washington and just get, sucked into the process, and then, with no term limits, work their tails off to stay in office, but not to accomplish anything. And when I say that, I'm not being mean-spirited. We have a president of the United States that spent 47 years in the US Senate and never accomplished a damn thing. And with that kind of resume, 81 million people, I'm told, voted for him. which I think is impressive. I mean, do any of these people manage businesses where they have to hire and fire and promote? Um, it's in,
Oh.
it, you know, some of this stuff, I don't know about you, but it worries the hell out of me. I'm not going to be around a whole lot longer, and I hate to see the country going this way.
Well, I would agree with it, but I honestly think regardless of what the vote count was, uh, people voted against Trump, bottom line. That's the reason why they voted for Joe Biden. I was thinking of voting for Joe Biden, and I finally decided, the guy is so senile, I couldn't do it. But Trump is so, regardless, in fact, I ordered for you the kid's book on Trump, and you'll be getting it shortly. It's a comic book that was put out by Huckabee's, bunch.
I saw that.
Yeah, well, you should be getting it shortly because I figured you would enjoy it. You could share it with your grandchildren. But if he weren't so obnoxious, had a little culture, a little class, he probably would have done well. And oddly enough, I think he'll probably do well in 2024. But I'm not sure we can take another 4 years of Trump.
This may come as a big surprise to you, but I share that thought. And right now, if I could handpick the Republican candidate, I would likely opt for Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, over Trump, because I really believe he would get in there and do many of the things that Donald Trump did. And to Donald Trump's credit, they were great achievements. But I'll say it a different way than you did, but I don't like the noise level with Donald Trump in the White House.
Yeah, my only concern with DeSantis is the stand he's taken on gay issues. And no, hold it. The problem is there are enough people in the United States who consider that to be a push button trigger mechanism that if he's going to stay on that route, there are a lot of people that'll go for him the same reason they went with Biden.
Let's clarify something here for our listeners, because when I reacted quickly the way I did, the thing he just passed that has been a lightning rod in the LGBTQXYZ community is the kindergarten through age 3, where the governor has put a prohibition on sex education, including teaching about homosexuality, transgenderism, and so forth. And I don't see a problem with that. I can remember, I'm 74 years old, but I can remember my kindergarten class, laying down on a blanket for the nap and sandbox and playing marbles and learning my alphabet. And, I didn't need any of that stuff. Is that what you're alluding to?
No.
Because
Ron
DeSantis is not a homophobe.
No,
that I can tell in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it doesn't matter even if he is a homophobe. In my mind, I'm just thinking that, well, first of all, I just stated it as the lightning rod it became, and you used the term. I don't think sex education should be taught until, what are they called now? They used to be junior high school. Now they're middle schools, whatever. I just think there's a certain age that's more appropriate, number one. But number two, I happen to agree with parents who think it's their responsibility. I don't think it's the government's responsibility to teach sex education, period.
Okay, but he's not, the legislation, or excuse me, I don't think that was legislation. I think that was an executive order from the governor's office. But regardless, he wasn't taking aim at the parents. He was protecting the prerogative of the parents to teach
Well,
sex education without, hear me out, without liberal school boards deciding that you know, children and particularly little ones need to hear that. Excuse me. Need to hear that stuff.
well, you see, my point, I already said what I think. But my point is the issue viewed through other people's eyes is going to be like, what do we call it? Noise. Yeah, it's going to be noise that people are going to say, well, the guy's a homophobe, the guy is this, the guy is that. I'm not going to vote for him because unfortunately, most American voters are like that, I think.
Well, Dick, this is a point counterpoint. I always respect your opinion. I think we try to do our best just to state our positions, even if they differ. Typically, they don't differ that much. But I used to hear the same argument about abortion. For God's sakes, don't wave the red flag in front of the liberal, bull, and lose elections over something that absolutely divides the country. And I'm, I've been a right to life for my whole, I'll say, political life, which is most of my life. I find abortion unconscionable and abhorrent. And I think conservatives in particular, and Republicans, which I'm not, I'm an independent, but I think the one thing I'll give to liberals, whatever crazy ideas they have, they go for it. I mean, they go for it with gusto. They get their talking points. They orchestrate, interaction with the media. And I mean, they're like an army marching across the country. And then we have the timidity of the GOP because we think, geez, we don't want to raise this or that issue. It could cost us an election. Well, we have to be about something. And I think what's happening in the classroom, and it's not just confined to sex education and bringing cross-dressers into the classroom under the guise of reading library books to the kids, and that's happening and continues to happen. But kids are being taught critical race theory, which we've talked about on previous podcasts, and other nonsense. They've either, when I say they, liberal school boards have either omitted the teaching of history and civics, or they rewrite textbooks to their political agenda. And I think we have to push back and fight back. So if DeSantis says, I don't want some little kindergarten kid being told about alternative sex, let the parents make the decision. That has no place in the classroom. I'm all for them.
Well, I agree with that, but my whole point is that I think there are some things that are age appropriate, number one, but number two, I won't even go to that. What I'll go to is the way it's done in Hawaii. In Hawaii, LGB hummer is accepted, and we refer to those people as mahu, and it's not a big deal. Your aunt, your uncle, whatever, they might be that way, and that's the way they are. I mean, they teach in the schools and everything else. It's no big deal. Somehow it became a big deal, and now we have to legislate it. Well, in Hawaii, it hasn't been legislated, and I don't think it's a major problem. And so I'm not sure what my point is I'm trying to make, but, somehow it's just turned into a political thing. And because of that, you got all these voters who latch on to one issue. I didn't get my Obama phone, my mortgage didn't get paid, blah, blah, blah. So I'll vote for the Democrats who didn't give it to me, but it's better than voting for Trump or DeSantis or somebody else. I mean, that's unfortunately, I think, the way it's become. I honestly think most people don't have a clue what they're voting for. In fact, I don't think they even understand what the purpose of voting is for.
Well, according to the latest polls, Biden is so far underwater that only 38% of the country, people of voting age, approve. And to your point, because I've scratched my head and asked myself, who in the hell are these 38%? Apart from the hardcore radical professors in the colleges and universities, I would agree with you. I'd say a good chunk of those people are low information voters, or to use your refrain, they don't know how to think critically. They were never taught to think critically. I mean, I just recently voted in a local election here in the county I live in. And my wife and I both had to spend hours with the sample ballot in front of us researching the judges, because you typically go into the ballot, into your precinct, and you have some familiarity with the higher offices, but when it comes to the judges, I mean, you're kind of clueless. I mean, in other words, you can't just get up, grab your whatever is required at your polling place to vote and vote. It takes some time. You got to research this stuff. And how many people do that?
Well, let's take a look at what's going on right now, because what you described is the vote for the Supreme Court. All these people in Congress and everything else, they don't have a clue who these people are. You got the one bunch that says, well, you got to have a black woman, which, don't get me going on that, because that's a hell of a reason to vote for a Supreme Court justice. But let's go back to the original thing. You don't know anything about this person. Yeah, they'll come around, make an office call and talk to you, but they don't have a clue. So what I and you run into trying to vote for judges is the same thing these legislators, and I use that term as an SIC, almost a misnomer, the same thing they're doing for the highest court in the land.
Well, on that particular issue, I agree with you. I mean, somebody handed Biden a list of one and said that's who it's going to be. She's pro Black Lives Matter. She's pro critical race theory. She's upheld light sentences for sexual predators, or conversely, reduced sentences. I mean, there's a lot there that needs to be studied and questioned by the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Well, if you go back 50 years when we started race relations training, and I was kind of in on the ground floor, I was one of the first with HUMRO, the Human Resources Research Institute, or organization. It wasn't popular, whatever, but if nothing else, we taught people to view other people's opinions, regardless of whether they were race or something else, and it worked out pretty well. So how did we get from there to where we are now? I mean, where we are now is divisive. I don't think it's based on any academic justification whatsoever, but that's the way people make decisions. People say Black Lives Matter. Well, I can turn around and say Black Labs matter. And that's the way I look at it. And being in an interracial marriage, it never even comes to mind. Never, ever comes to mind. I never think about it. I don't look around and go, ooh, are those eyes this way or that way or whatever. And it worked for 50 years. So how it's turned out as screwed as it is now, I don't have a clue. And it really irritates me.
It irritates me too, because if I challenge the current nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court by Joe Biden and challenge that person's credentials, the left will smear me as racist.
That's great. Oh, that's the term we can use all the time. Well, you're just a racist.
Well, yeah, and same with the term homophobe. I mean, I never asked a person's sexual orientation, even before you didn't have to worry about what you asked. I mean, I've had all that training and I've done that training. I always tried to hire the best person for a job.
Yeah, but that raises something. I got to ask you, because I never figured it out. What exactly is a homophobe?
Well, yeah, I mean, do you want I don't know if that's rhetorical.
Well, that's the point. Does that mean I'm afraid for some reason, or what's it supposed to mean? I mean, because that term's thrown around all the time. If you're a racist doesn't work, then I'll just call you a homophobe.
Well, now I'm with you. To your point, Dick, and I agree, these terms are bandied about, and most of the people who throw them up in your face probably couldn't give you the definition of the term anyway. It's just a way to shut you up or slight you, or and I mean, racist, homophobe, those are weapons. Call them arrows in the quiver of the Democratic Party. I mean, have a different position than they do on a particular issue, and out come the ad hominem attacks, two of which are those two words.
But what are they?
It's just another one that I hear all the time, is the term systemic, as in systemic racism, or the term existential as in existential threat. I mean, if Chuck Schumer has said existential threat once, he has said it 1,000 times, and I don't know that most people even know what in the hell he's talking about. I don't know that he may know what it talks about, but I know if you say something poses an existential threat, boy, it has kind of a sense of gravitas to it. That's an imposing term.
Well, it still goes back to the question, what is a homophobe?
Well, Dick, I'm not going to respond because I guess in its most simplistic definition is a bias against homosexuals.
Well, yeah, and that's what it's become. But if you go back to the basic Latin, homophobe basically means that you're afraid of
Yeah,
homosexuals.
right. Which,
but sure,
I've never heard that. I've never heard that homosexuals are roaming the downtown streets of our metropolitan areas and attacking people. So, what? Nah, I don't mean to be flippant, but
well, no, but I think it's a valid point as we try to educate voters. Instead of throwing these terms around, you really have to understand what they mean. Now, my sister's gay, and there are a lot of issues there, but I'm not afraid of her. I don't really care if that's the lifestyle she wants. And, if there were an election, she was running for something, and she hasn't, but if she were, I wouldn't worry about it, because that's not an issue that would have anything to do with most elective contests.
I agree.
And yet that seems to be how your left runs.
Okay. I've got to talk about one other thing if I can harken back to St. Patrick's Day. Do I have time?
Okay, but you only have 5 more minutes and then we're done.
Oh, I'll be quicker than that. Nancy Pelosi, who can't just, hide in her $10 million mansion in San Francisco eating her gourmet ice cream, she went to a luncheon on St. Patrick's Day, and she regaled the crowd with a poem.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, oh, you heard about it.
Oh, yes.
Written by Bono, not Sonny Bono, he's deceased, but
the singer.
The singer, Bono, yeah. And I will not read it because it'd be kind of counterproductive to say that the poem was a piece of what, and then turn around and read it and annoy everybody on the podcast. But I think a third grade classroom, if tasked with writing a poem for St. Patrick's Day, could probably do better than Bono did. And of course, Pelosi's delivery, I think she'd had 2 or 3 gimlets before she got up to the microphone. She had almost as much trouble reading this silly poem as Biden does a teleprompter. But anyways, that's between Bono's shot at Irishmen being dumb and Pelosi thinking Bono can write poetry. And these people are in charge of the nation. Holy cow.
Well, that's always been my argument. You know, back in the days, and I've told you this, we were friends with Humphrey, Clark McGregor, the one that resigned from Congress and everything. I mean, what the hell? Again, what has happened?
I don't know.
Now, I know I could ask you my favorite questions. What do we do about it? And you would wax eloquently,
There's
forever.
no time left now.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have the time. But, back in the days of streetlights and drinking out of garden hoses and everything else, we didn't have these issues. And somehow we've got screwed around. And the question I would ask our readers, and I've asked you many times, is how do we fix it? And it's almost like it's not fixable. It's like it's gone amok.
Well, when a large contingent of Yale students shows up to protest a free speech symposium that was going to include both liberal and conservative speakers, maybe it has to start in our college and university system. But before we get off, I don't think I've ever done this. And this is our 35th podcast, folks. For those of you who listen, would you please tell your friends, relatives, co-workers about our podcast? You can find all 34 of them if you go to YouTube and type in under search Dick Griggs, Griggs. There you will find the whole catalog, so to speak.
Or if you type in the number seniors, same thing happens, and you can get the same thing on Facebook.
Very good, because we'd love to grow the audience. And by the way, leave comments. Just as we champion critical thinking, we can accept critical comments. Right, Dick?
Yeah, as long as you don't call us a homophobe. Okay, we're out of time. And because Bernie says I cut him off last time, he gets to say goodbye.
Okay. Well, folks, sayonara.